And now it's time to preview an upcoming game with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here yet again, this time broadcasting from my friendly local game store, Rockheads Comics and Games, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Today we're going to be taking a look at another Kickstarter preview. This time we have a game by Mage Company called Phobos, which is a game about hiding your fears and trying to reveal the fears of other players. Before I go into too much about that, why don't we just go take a look at everything? Before we get there, I want to remind you that these components are not the final quality components. They are prototype components that represent the function but not necessarily the form of what you'll get when you pledge for this game. Without too much ado, why don't we just go ahead and take a look at how the game plays, and then I'll come back here and I'll sum it all up for you. Here you can see the components for Phobos all set up for a 4-player game. In the center of the table here you have a house or an area with 4 central halls, 1, 2, 3, 4, where players are going to enter this board with their meeples, and you have all these other rooms around the board that show the various fears of people in the game. Now the idea of this game is that each player represents a character trying to discover the 3 hidden fears of the other players. And at the beginning of the game, each player is dealt 3 fears. These 3 fears could be many different things, but for example, we have bacteriophobia, so it's the fear of germs. Or we have the fear of guns. And this player's 3rd fear is the fear of planes, or fear of flying. So they have 3 fears. In addition, the next player will get 3 different fears. The green player here is feared of heights. They have the fear of food or fear of barbecue, and you have a fear of enclosed spaces, so agoraphobia. And the other 2 players will have different fears. It could be clowns or needles or death, whatever the case may be. They have 3 hidden fears they're trying to protect. Each player will also have a set of tokens with the numbers 1, 2, and 3 on them. They have 4 of each of those tokens that they'll be placing onto their player boards and moving between player boards to try and discover the other player's fears. They're also going to have some meeples that they're going to be placing onto the board, and placing these tokens and moving them around will give them movement points with which to place their meeples and move them around this house. Moving around the house from the central halls to all of the different fear rooms that depict the different fears will allow them to either prevent other people from discovering their fears or allow them to kick other people off of rooms that they're trying to protect in order to reveal the fears of those players. In addition to those pieces, each player is going to have their own player board, and these player boards are varied for each player, but essentially they're going to depict all of the different fears and then a series of columns and individual pieces that they can be placed on when you play cards, and I'll cover those cards in just a moment. But note that this is the crown column, this is the house column, this is the ball column, and then each of these 4 puzzle pieces represent the one icon directly adjacent to it, either gun, needle, death, or food. Now, as I said, each player will additionally have their Phobos cards that they start the game with. And those Phobos cards are going to allow them to play pieces onto their board in order to get moves, and then move those pieces onto other players' boards to try and reveal their fears. So we'll take a look at a typical card here. This card right here says that first a player, when he plays this card, and that'll be the first thing they do on their turn, must place one of their pieces on a puzzle piece icon on their board. Now, as I said just a moment ago, that would be any of the 4 directly next to the puzzle piece: the gun, the needle, the food, or death. Now the player would want to make sure that they're not placing on their own fear spot. So they don't want to place on food, because if they do so, that would immediately reveal this fear for them and they would have lost one of their 3 fears. The objective being to protect your fears while trying to reveal everybody else's. So they don't want to place on food, and they know that. So they're going to look at this and they're going to say, I have to place one of my pieces on puzzle pieces. So they're going to look and say, okay, just not food. So maybe they place this 3 on death. Fear of death. After that, they must move one piece from a crown space to the player to their left. Well, they're going to look and see if they have any crown pieces. They do not. So they can't do this portion, but if they had a piece in this crown column, they must pick it up and move it to a corresponding crown column on the player to their left. So they'd look and say, okay, which one of these do I think they have the fear of? They know it's not food, but maybe they think they have the fear of planes or mirrors or death. And they would move it from the corresponding place on their board to the one that they want to try and reveal on the other player's board. And if they successfully catch one of them, for example, if they had moved it onto planes, this player would reveal their fear, and they would have one less fear to protect throughout the game. After they've completed the house part, or the second part of their action card, they're going to move on to the 3rd part, which is placing a token onto a house token or house spot on their board. So first puzzle, then moving from a crown to the player to the left, then placing a token onto a house spot on their board, which is anything in this middle column. Now, our player is afraid of heights and closed spaces, so they don't want to place on either of those 2. But maybe they'll go ahead and they'll place a 2 token to get 2 movement points onto the fear of water. and they discard their action card next to the action card deck to be, out of the game later. They'll draw another one at the end of their turn. Now that they've done this, they're going to get 5 movement points. 3 for placing this token, and 2 for placing this token. If they had moved a token to the left of another player's board onto another player's board, say for example they had placed a 1 and they moved it to this player's board, they would get 1 more movement point because they moved 1 more token of their own color. If this had been a token of somebody else's color, and this is an important distinction in this game, you can move tokens of somebody else's color on your turn, and there are reasons to do that. You would not get the movement point. You only get points for tokens of your own that you have placed or moved during the turn. So in this case we get 3 for placing here and 2 for placing here. That's 5 movement points to place and move meeples out onto the central board. What you're going to do with these is you're going to start by placing them into the central hall. There are 4 of these central halls and you can place into any of them, but you're going to want to place into them to move out onto the board to try and protect your own fears. So maybe this player would start in this one right here, and that costs 1 movement point to add a guy to a central hall. From the central hall, meeples can only move into the fear rooms that are adjacent, being 1, 2, or 3, either orthogonally or diagonally adjacent, these 3 right here, or they can move to other central halls, and that would cost 1 movement point for any of those that you wanted to move to. So for example, our player could move his meeple from here into the Fear of Heights room, and this is going to give him 1 meeple protecting the Fear of Heights, but 1 meeple's not enough. You actually need 2. So he actually can't move a second meeple into this room on his turn, but he still has 3 movement points that he must use. He used 1 to place and 1 to move. So now maybe he places another one into this hall right over here, and he decides to place 1 there and move a piece over to here to kind of give the faux illusion that he also has the fear of death. So now he's used 4 movement points and he can place 1 more meeple onto the board. This is important because you're not allowed to place 2 meeples into the same room on the same turn, but you can get 2 meeples into the same room eventually through multiple turns. In order to do this, of course, you're going to have to place and move meeples on consecutive turns or on various different turns. But when you have 2 meeples in a room, that fear that you have is now protected from being revealed, which means that if an opponent places and moves a disc onto your fear, for example here the Fear of Heights, since I have 2 meeples in this room, I do not have to reveal my fear. And this will protect me from losing 1/3 of my fears that I'm trying to protect. So it's basically a way to place meeples out onto the board, use those movement points to protect your own interests, and hopefully not have them reveal your fears. And maybe by the time that by the time somebody else displaces one of your meeples from this board, you can move this piece on and no longer need that protection. So the idea is to use your meeples out here to, of course, protect what you're trying to do. Now, alternatively, if somebody else is protecting a fear, let's say that red, even though I don't know what their fears are currently, is trying to protect the fear of death. I can, later on, move my meeples into that room and use an extra movement point to kick them out of the room. Once I've done this, if they're protecting the fear of death, and I, of course, have a marker on the fear of death, they're going to have to reveal that. So you can move in, replace one of their meeples, and hopefully force them from being protected, or remove them from being protected from having to release their own fear. Now, it's important to know that you may not ever move from one fear room to another fear room. So I'm not allowed to ever move, for example, from the death room to the fear of insects. I would have to move back into the central hall using a movement point, and then move, of course, back into the fear of insects. That would cost me 1 move to here and 1 move to there. If someone were occupying that central hall, I would be able to move my meeple into there, but I would have to kick their meeple out, and that's going to cost 2 of my movement points. So it's going to cost 2 to move into here to kick that guy out, and then 1 to move into the fear of insects, 3 of my movement points. Regardless, on your turn, you must use all of your movement points. So even if you don't have a way to end up where you want to be, you're going to have to utilize all of those movement points so that you're down to 0 by the end of your turn. At the end of that turn, you're going to have 2 cards left, and you have 2 choices. You may either draw 1 new card from the action card deck, or you may draw a card from these extra special card deck, which are called adrenaline cards. But in order to draw one of these cards, you must permanently remove one of your ghosts from your, basically, area of play. So you can't remove one from the board, but you can remove a ghost that you have in your supply from the game in order to draw one of these adrenaline cards. Now these cards are special because they have special actions on them. This one gives you 3 choices of when you play it, which you want to play onto. So you can play onto any of the puzzle pieces, the houses, or the crowns when you play this card, and you get to play one of your tokens in order to get movement points. But others of these cards are going to give you different benefits. For example, this one here is going to let you discard your action card hand in order to get 3 new action cards. Or this one here is going to prevent one player of your choice from taking a turn on one of their future turns. This one here is going to be the secret path. And the secret path counts the number of opponents' ghosts that are out onto the hall here, and it's going to give you 2 movement points for each one of those. So you're going to play one of these cards in lieu of playing your action card on your turn in order to get some type of special benefit. Alternatively, to kind of illustrate how the revealing of other players' fears works, let's talk about what this player could have done on their turn to potentially reveal the fear of the yellow player. So let's take back their move. Instead of placing these 2 tokens, they will use the same card to place the tokens in a different manner. So let's take a look. They play this same card that they played earlier, and they're going to place one of their tokens onto a puzzle piece. Let's say, for example, they place a 3 onto the fear of guns here. That player's not afraid of guns, so it doesn't reveal their own fear. Now they have to move a piece from the crown to the player to their left's board. So we'll take a look at the crown. Well, they have a piece there. They've placed a 3, and now they're moving a 3, and they're going to place it on the plane spot of this player's board. Now, this player is afraid of planes, and since they're not protected out on the board out here, they're going to have to reveal their fear. If they had 2 of their pieces in the planes area, they wouldn't have to reveal it, but they don't. So now they have to reveal their fear, and they're going to show it off. Now, when this happens, they get to discard one of the cards from their hand, and they get to pick a card from the deck to add to their hand, so they can go through this action card deck, and they can essentially replace one of the cards in their hand with any card they want. But they now have 1 fewer fear to protect and are 1/3 of the way to being kicked out of the game. This player would then continue their turn by placing onto their houses, finishing up their turn, and essentially continuing on. So maybe they place this on the fear of clowns. And now they would still have 3, 6, 7, 8 movement points to use out on the board, as I showed you previously. This player gets their benefit for having their card revealed by somebody else. If it had been revealed by themselves, they actually would not get the benefit. So you have to be careful to not reveal your own cards, not use a card that forces you to reveal your own cards. But if you get revealed by somebody else, you do get a benefit that's going to help you kind of keep up in the game. On a future turn, this player could decide to move this token away if they wanted to, but now that this fear has been revealed, it's no longer important. If the player had been protecting it and not had to reveal their fear, they may want to move this on a future turn before someone kicks them out of this room. Either way, you're going to continue playing in this matter. This player would draw their hand up, either drawing a new action card or one of the other special cards that they can add to their hand, and then play would pass to the left, so the yellow player would now have a chance to take their turn, playing a card from their hand, placing pieces and moving them in order to try and reveal other players' fears, and then moving out onto this board to try and protect or prevent other players from protecting their fears. You're going to continue on in this manner until all of the players except for one have had all of their fears removed. Now, in a 4-player game or a 3+ player game, players that are kicked out are going to continue playing. They're not going to have any fears to protect because they've all been revealed, but they're going to play until essentially all of the other players are revealed except for one. Manipulating the board, moving pieces around, trying to reveal the fears of other players, and essentially playing a ghoul player in the game. They just kind of get to keep playing, but they don't have the investment of trying to win. So, you'll keep playing in this manner until one player is the only player that has fears still hidden, and that player will be the winner of Phobos. Well, there you have it. That is Phobos by Mage Company. Kind of an interesting game, but before we go too much into the summary, I want to talk about one thing that I did skip over briefly in the gameplay. And that's when somebody's fear is revealed, either by themselves because they made a mistake, or because a player moved a token to their sheet, that player's room, the room corresponding to the fear that's been revealed, is going to flip over and become another center hall. And so you'll be able to move from various other places as the board or as the game changes. As more people reveal their fears, there'll be more central halls, giving more movement options to move around and try and protect your further fears. Now, the game does have an interesting dynamic of being able to place those discs, trying to use the cards you have in hand to place those discs on your sheet, move them to your opponents and try and narrow down what their fears might be, and then use the movement points to either protect your own fears on the board or to try and prevent them from protecting their fears. So it's all very strategic in the placement of those discs and the movement, the memorization of what people's fears might be, and trying to kind of glean what they might be trying to protect by watching their meeples out on the board. If this sounds interesting to you from the summary and from my brief explanation there, definitely check out their Kickstarter page. They're looking for pledges. The project has just started, and I know they'd appreciate your support.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.